I think that everyone has to pay attention to this multi-chain thesis of, what's going on with Cosmos, what's going on with zkSync, and even Polkadot, connecting chains. It's big business.
So let's roll in today. We're going to talk about Ethereum. We're going to talk about layer twos and how we're going to be able to process millions of transactions in the future. And so we're going to discuss kind of what's happening on layer twos right now. We had the Ethereum merge, and ultimately next is layer twos. So, Justin, what is happening there?
Yeah, the exciting news today is that zkSync, which is a zero knowledge rollup, is launching their mainnet next week on October 28th. So this has been highly anticipated, probably the most highly anticipated layer two to scale Ethereum. Vitalik is personally a fan of zero knowledge rollups over optimistic rollups. And so a lot of people see this as the real solution to scaling Ethereum, these zero knowledge rollups. And so the zkSync team really is developed by a company called Matter Labs. They are hoping to have a smooth launch next week and start to onboard a bunch of apps and test out the scalability there, potentially in the multiple thousands of transactions per second capacity. And what's interesting about zkSync is that they have a long-term plan to actually create a layer 3 ecosystem, which is like a roll-up on top of a roll-up, and sort of compete against the Cosmos vision of having all these interconnected chains. And I don't really think anyone was expecting this out of a roll-up. And so this is quite new, and no one really knows how it's going to work, but it sounds very interesting if they can make this work and have, potentially unlimited scalability on their ecosystem.
So some of the chatter I hear sometimes is that, as we move these different layers, there's a problem with composability, right? Let our listeners know, is that true, false? Kind of, is this a problem with Ethereum moving forward?
Yeah, so the composability topic is a big one, and it's really important to understand how composability affects the different chain architectures. So what people mean by composability is that it's the ability for one app to build on top of another app directly. And so to give you an example, Yearn Finance or Yearn Finance, however you want to say it, they currently are built on top of various lending protocols on Ethereum. So like Compound and Aave. And so if you deposit your USDC into Yearn, it's going to put some of that into Compound, put some of that into Aave and other yield opportunities and sort of manage that yield for you. So that all happens in one transaction. When you click the deposit button, your USDC or whatever you're depositing is sprinkled all to these other protocols in one go. And that is sort of the magic that makes it all work, is that these apps are able to directly integrate with each other, and everything just happens in a snap in one transaction. And so that's composability. Now, in the multi-chain world where you've got apps on different chains, it's a bit more difficult because you'd have to like bridge tokens around to do things. So like if you deposit your USDC into Yearn and it's on a chain and the lending protocol's on this other chain, well, then you'd have to do another transaction to get those tokens into a bridge, and then that bridge has to send those to the lending protocol, and then that lending protocol has to send the notes tokens back that represent your share of the collateral pool. And you've just got these multiple transactions happening, and it's not instant, and potentially things could fail. Like if your deposit by the time it gets over to the lending protocol, it doesn't accept it anymore because it's like hit a ceiling or something, right? So when you've got multiple transactions going, not only is it more friction, but it's extremely more complex for developers to actually make these integrations happen. And the real buzzword that you're going to see around this is synchronous versus asynchronous composability. And so synchronous is when everything is on the same chain and there's just one transaction that can do everything for you. And asynchronous is when you've got something on another chain, you have to send potentially multiple transactions over that other chain, wait for things to happen, and then get the result back whether or not the transactions succeeded or failed. That is asynchronous. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of the high-speed DeFi apps or the really tightly integrated DeFi apps that rely on a lot of protocols, say like an options market that needs DEX and lending markets and market makers and oracles and all this infrastructure, those projects are tending to end up on a monolithic synchronous chain like Solana. And the vision there is that you just give these people the fastest transactions per second to handle these big composable projects. But the long tail of apps that aren't necessarily requiring this deep composability, those potentially are ending up on the multi-chain thesis of many different app chains all coming together. And that's where like the Cosmos vision comes into play. And that's where this now layer 3 vision for zkSync comes into play, is that you have all these smaller chains that are connected in some way, and it allows you to bridge tokens in a seamless manner in between the chains. And that allows asynchronous composability. It's not as good as synchronous, but there are ways to make it work. It just takes, more time and developer resources to happen.
So when we connect all these different layers and we also are bridging assets, don't we lose security in that network?
You can, yeah. So, we've seen a number of bridge hacks this year where people bridge tokens over, not really thinking about it, like, oh, well, I'm just going to move my USDC over to this chain. And the next thing you know, it's gone. And the USDC tokens that you have on the destination chain are now worthless because the original USDC that's in the bridge is gone. It's been taken by a hacker. So bridge design is very crucial. And in my opinion, the only way that a multi-chain ecosystem works is to have bridges with as strong of security guarantees as the chain itself. And so we can't be doing this multi-sig nonsense where it's just some, committee of like 5 out of 7 random people the developers happen to know to run these servers and not collude. You really need some crypto economics behind these bridges that provide strong mathematical guarantees that they're not going to take the money and run. So in the Cosmos world, this is accomplished by the IBC, which is their inter-blockchain communication protocol, where basically every chain is a light client of the hub chain. And so that allows you to do on-chain verification that tokens were moved in and out of the chain. And then it also is secured by this new concept of interchain security. And that's just part of the Cosmos or Atom 2.0 deal, where they're going to allow all of these smaller chains to use the validators of the Cosmos hub chain as their validators. And so there's a lot more money behind those Cosmos validators. And so you have a much stronger guarantee that someone hasn't bought up, 51% of the token supply and is secretly running all the validators themselves, right? That's what would have to happen for someone to, defraud a bridge with a double spend or a chain revert or something. So that's the way Cosmos is handling it. On the zkSync side, I've heard this term native bridges thrown around. And I think the idea there is that they're able to produce these zero knowledge proofs between the chains, right? Because if you're gonna prove on another chain in the Cosmos style that a transaction went through, that's where you have to have IBC and you have to have all of these, light clients running on chain. It just makes the nodes, you have to, have beefier servers for your nodes and so forth. So these native bridges, if you can compress the proof down to a small size, the small zero knowledge proof that a transaction went through and that you can, you deposited to the bridge or that you're withdrawing from the bridge, potentially that's a really scalable solution there where they can have all of these light rollups running and you're able to just bridge between all the rollups with zero knowledge proofs. And you don't never have to trust any multi-sig or anything like that. You don't have to run, a bunch of light clients on all the chains to do that. So it's a really interesting concept. And we'll have to see how it evolves because it's definitely relying on some really novel mathematics, all the zero knowledge stuff is. So it's definitely easier said than done to actually make that work.
It seems like everything in life, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think this is definitely something that all crypto investors have to be watching out for because the chains that win really matters, right? If you've put all your money into this project and it's heavily invested in this one chain and the code is written for this one chain and all of the developer tools and the analytics and everything is for that chain, there's a lot of friction to migrate to another chain if it turns out that the chain you're on really sucks or it's just not getting liquidity or users. So it's really important to pick the right chain. And as an investor, you've got to be looking out for what is going to win in the long run. And I think that everyone has to pay attention to this multi-chain thesis of, what's going on with Cosmos, what's going on with zkSync and even Polkadot, connecting chains. It's big business. And it definitely, a lot of the monolithic chain proponents are not as aware of what's going on in the multi-chain thesis world because they just think, oh, we can just throw everything on one chain and it's fine. Like, a lot of the Solana supporters are definitely succumbing to that fallacy. And I think that as that thesis gets challenged, we could see a rotation of capital from monolithic chains like Ethereum, like Solana, like Cardano into the more multi-chain ones, particularly like Atom and maybe now zkSync, that are able to handle this multi-chain ecosystem with native bridging functionality and also the ability to handle faults and forks and disruptions in the smaller chains. And that's one that I really want to emphasize at this point, is that in the multi-chain world, you can have fork governance. You can basically say, like, you know what, we need to hard fork our chain, and it's a controversial hard fork. Maybe there's some controversial upgrade, whether it's going to proof of stake from proof of work or changing the tokenomics, whatever. You have some controversial upgrade. The last thing you want is to fork off into two competing chains. I mean, just imagine the chaos if ETH proof of work and ETH proof of stake existed simultaneously, but were like basically split down the middle with 50% of the users going either way. There would be pure chaos, because you might have like USDT on one chain that is considered legitimate and USDC on the other chain that's considered legitimate. Well, that's going to cause a lot of lending protocols on either chain to become insolvent. If you have a house NFT, now you have two of them on either chain. Which one really represents your house, right? If you have real world assets, it becomes really messy. If we want chains to actually have really important stuff on chain, we have to avoid forks as much as possible. And we have to have a governance process around how do we fork the chain? How do we do upgrades? How do we handle bugs and hacks? The multi-chain ecosystem is primed to support that, because you can have a hub chain or some sort of governance chain like the Cosmos Hub that has established governance procedures and processes that you subscribe to. And you say, look, we're going to stand up our app chain, but if anything goes wrong, we have to do a fork. We're going to use the court system in the hub chain and the governance process over there to decide which fork is legitimate and which software you should download to resume on the new fork. And that is what is truly going to allow real world assets and things that you can't really fork to come on chain. Whereas the monolithic chains are going to have less of an ability to deal with that. And I think they're going to be more focused on, the high speed composable DeFi that just absolutely needs to stay located right next to each other for the synchronicity.
So for the listeners that are also obviously investing for themselves, is there anything specifically they should be looking at when it comes to Cosmos and IBC?
I really like, of course, the Atom token is great because it gives you sort of a seat at the table of what's potentially going to be the most sophisticated experiment in governance in the crypto ecosystem, with all of the hierarchies and councils that they're building in there. I think if you are interested in crypto governance and you want to have a say in a project, Atom is a great one to get into, as well as it having, potentially a central role in a big multi-chain ecosystem, securing all these different chains and sort of getting revenue from cross-chain flows. So it's a great play there. I also really like the Osmosis DEX in the Atom ecosystem, because they're shaping out to be the leading DEX, and that is a crucial building block for Cosmos and for any blockchain system. So I would say check out those two tokens if you're interested.
It's awesome. And if anyone else wants to DM you any questions in regards to zkSync, Cosmos, where should they do that?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at JGrizzled1, JGrizzled1.
The Joe Roberts Show.